This is Ahval Online, meeting point of accurate news and free comment on the current affairs of Turkey. Welcome to our podcast series. Hello and welcome to Ahval Hot Pursuit, part of Ahval's podcast and video series. Joining me from Paris, Professor Hamit Bozarslan with School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences. Good to have you, Hamit.
Nice to have you.
Today, we have a hot topic to discuss and hear your views about. That is the sort of, multi-layered crisis. One part with Turkey as epicenter. One is of course, the escalating crisis within NATO, with Turkey as epicenter, squeezing Finland and Sweden to a corner, and also indirectly pushing the United States into concessions on certain conditions, lifting of or easing of the embargoes, and also declaring PYD, YPG, the Kurdish militia in Syria, known for its battle against ISIS, declared as terrorist organization, part of or linked with PKK, and also regarding Sweden and Finland, extradition of certain PKK or dissident elements from these countries to Turkey. But second level is, of course, which is much more imminent and serious than that, is the declared potential incursion onto Syrian soil. If some other reports are true, even enhanced operation onto Iraqi Kurdistan. This is where we are at today. As of today, this is 1st of June, Wednesday, President Erdogan repeated again his troops' readiness to enter Syria. And if you read into his words, the operation seems imminent. This, of course, poses lots of questions, but I think the main question that should we make us pay attention to is how you read into this new situation with Turkey as epicenter. How serious is the potential incursion onto Syria, and what this means for the international politics in crisis at the moment?
I think that the first point to be taken into consideration is that Turkey is playing its capacity of blacklisting and blackmailing as the only power that it has. And in a very tense international situation with the war in Ukraine and with the clear-cut positions of the Western democracies against Russia. In this perspective, this power of blackmailing is a limited power. It does not mean that Erdogan will not be able to enter in the Rojava, in the Syrian Kurdistan, will not be able to destroy the Kurdish autonomy in the Kobane region, which was symbolically a very important region. It does not mean not either that it will not be able to challenge Americans in this field. And I think that we should also remember that the crisis with the NATO is a double crisis. First of all, the Turkey does want the Americans to change their entire foreign policy in the Middle East, but they ask also Finland and Sweden and other democracies to cease to be democracies and to follow the autocratic rules of Turkey. And there is a second dimension in the NATO crisis, that's of course the crisis with Greece. And all that makes a lot of the military victory in Syria, if the incursions take place, does not mean that Erdogan will win. The tactical victories might be possible, but the strategic victories are not possible, because I think that Turkey is not more able to have any kind of strategic thinking and any kind of strategic projection in the future.
But there must be an end game in the whole, setting. After all, there must be an end game of Erdogan. What is this? A lot of people have divided views about this. Certainly, for example, in a debate in Sweden, some debaters think that these are serious conditions that should be taken into account, whereas some other parts agree that this has nothing to do with Sweden or Finland. These conditions, they have directly to do with Erdogan's burning desire to be accepted as an equal counterpart by President Biden, and also indirectly, or as part of it, by the Congress, which is rather hostile to Erdogan right now. And also regarding the Endgame overall debate outside Sweden and Finland in the United States or elsewhere is that there is, of course, a domestic political dimension of it, but also looking at the patterns of the past maybe 10 years, Turkey is not only flexing the muscles once more, but attempting to find a place where it will be one of the major decision makers of the regional security architecture, as well as NATO's enhanced enlargement plans, and also the overall security architecture. How do you see these discussions? Where do you find yourself in this overall debate?
It is very difficult to see any kind of end game. Because with Erdogan, I think that there is no end game at all, because each step brings another step, and each step brings another step. And I think that one should be aware that since 10 or 15 years, Erdogan's foreign policy was exclusively a foreign policy based on tensions, war, and crisis with almost everyone. Just take the Middle East. There was a crisis with Israel, thereafter with Egypt, with Saudi Arabia, with the Emirates. In Europe, there were crises with Germany, with the Netherlands, with France, and now with Sweden, etc. So I think that that's the logic of the game is that the game has no end at all, and no rational end, and no rational final stop where Erdogan can say, I am finally satisfied, I can stop here. It is obvious that the fact that the Greek Prime Minister has been received at the White House, and he has been ovationed in at least at seven times in the Congress.
Some other people counted up to 12 times.
Or 25, or even one, or even twice. It means that that was for Erdogan a very heavy narcissistic failure, because he will never be able to be received by the Congress. But on the other side, I think that even if he was accepted once again at the White House, as that used to be under the Trump administration, that will not change anything, because Erdogan has a long-term perspective. This long-term perspective is the perspective of 2071. According to him, by 2071, which is the millennium of the first Turkish victory against the Byzantine Empire, and by 2071, Turkey has to be restored in its ontological purity. Turkey has to be restored in its moral and material strength and power, and a new period of millennium, a new millennium of Turkish domination, imperial domination, or world domination has to be started. This is the perspective, but 2071, at least for my generation, is really far away, and for a younger Turk or Kurd in Turkey who is only 20, it means that he will be 70 by then. So the issue is how to come there. And I think that the recent conflicts with almost everyone during the 15 years show that Erdogan can go, advance, conquer, declare a new war, again a new war, again a new crisis. And at the same time, all this does not make any point, because even controlling Afrin, even controlling some other parts of Syria, even controlling some parts of Caucasia, that does not bring him so much. These tactical steps cannot be converted into strategic thinking and a strategically reasonable, rational line that will enable Turkey to become a power. Turkey is not a regional power. Turkey is not a NATO power. Turkey Turkey thinks that it has a very big and undeniable strategical position and strength. That is not the case. And that's because it's not the case that at the end, Turkey is obliged to capitulate before Israel once again, before Al-Sisi once again, before Saudi Arabia, before the Emirates. Tomorrow, maybe there will be a new conflict with Iran because Iran is absolutely opposed to the Turkish expansion policy, not only in Syria, but also in the Caucasus. Tomorrow, there might be a new conflict with Iran and a new capitulation. So I think that these tactics, when you addition them, they make only new tactics. They require a period of calming down, and once again, a new crisis starts. So I think that the Erdogan foreign policy is nothing more than this. And at the end, I think that this game cannot be won. Once again, that does not mean that he will not be able to make a new incursion in Syria. I think that for Erdogan, Kobane was a huge failure because he announced in 2014 that Kobane was about to fall, and Kobane resisted, and the Americans helped Kobane to resist. That was for him an absolute turning point. Now he wants his revenge, and Erdogan's main strategy is revenge, and once again revenge. But this revenge is addition. They do not make any kind of strategy. And at the end, the price is very heavy, and the price is very heavy because there is no more mechanisms of control and check and control within the Turkish state apparatus. The state is very much paramilitarized. Today, they are not anymore the militaries as they were before. That was before that controlled the system. You have the other organization as the Turkish Wagner, which is the Sadat organization, the special forces of the gendarmerie and the police, which are controlled by the radical right, Turkish radical right. You have the Syrian jihadists. All these actors, they have their own strategies. You have the pro-Putin camp in Turkey, which has its own strategy. So additionally, these strategies, that will not be an easy task either. We are facing a kind of adventurism. And this in a situation of a very heavy economical crisis. And this economical crisis will not stop here. Every serious economist warns that the new steps and the new deepening of the economic crisis will be there by the 2023, 2024. So I think that the margins of maneuver of Erdogan, they are very narrow. But once again, that does not mean that he will not be able to make a new incursion in Syria or provoke a new crisis within the NATO, or even tomorrow have a much more broader tension with Greece.
That points out to a huge historic paradox, doesn't it? I mean, NATO now is engaged fully in battling an autocrat, but inside NATO, many NATO members perceive leadership of Turkey as another autocrat or autocracy, but it is there, and it is sort of causing internal crisis. That is part of the paradox. On the other hand, years of appeasement to sort of calm down this leadership, to de-escalate the crisis with Greece and with the region, etc. Those have been continuously thrown curveballs, that they were disappointed, all those positive agenda boosters or supporters. Now, this paradox is placing a continuous dilemma for the Western Bloc, and it poses lots of questions for the future. And you said tactical continuity, continuous tactics, and does it mean that this will be also an accepted status quo for the Western Bloc to basically wait Turkey out until it sorts out its own domestic crisis, maybe some sort of internal regime change, or do you see any other dynamic there?
I don't see any other dynamic. What I see is that Turkey's image outside in Europe and the United States is really not good. And I don't know, I don't see how this image can be improved either with the new war tactics of Erdogan or with the strategy of appeasement. My colleague Cengiz Aktar has written recently that the strategy of appeasement means only one thing: failure again failure for the democracies. And I think that we have two dimensions in the case, the question of the NATO and in the question of the Western Bloc. On one side, of course, we have the Western Bloc, or the so-called Western Bloc, and Erdogan. When you read his entire written work or oral work, his statements, his speeches, his 10 or 15 years, he is basically anti-Western. He is thinking like Putin that Turkey as a civilization, the Turkish nation as a irreducible nation to any other form of nation. Turkey has an ontology, this ontology as a pure ontology, and this ontology is constantly threatened by the Western ontology, which is supposed to be an alienating, corrupted, and corrupting ontology. So for Erdogan, that's very clear. There is a kind of clash of civilizations, and this clash of civilization is also a clash of ontologies. And from that point of view, I think that you can read them really in parallel what Putin says about the West and what Erdogan says about the West. And that does mean also that they do not, neither Putin nor Erdogan, they really do not know the Russian and the Turkish history. When you take the Turkish history, if there were not France and Germany and Great Britain, Turkey would have been disappeared from the map in 1853 during the Crimean War and 1876-77 during the war with Russia. That's the one point. But on the other side, as Klaus Mann said about Nazi Germany, when the Nazis said all this is about the Jews, actually they meant all this was about the Enlightenment and democracy. When Erdogan says the Western countries, the Western Bloc, in reality, what he means is not exactly the West, but that's a democratic system. That's also very much true for Putin. What Putin understands by West is the democracy. And both leaders, they understand themselves, their model, as the viral, anti-liberal, anti-democratic alternatives to the Western democracies. And I think that's why we should ask the question of the struggle between the democracies and the anti-democracies. And the question is to know what the European democracies and what the American democracy will act vis-a-vis Turkey, not Turkey as people or society, whatever you can imagine, but Turkey as the Erdogan regime, and to what extent they will continue to try to appease it or to capitulate before this for having themselves some tactical victories. We know history teaches us that that's not possible. We experienced it in the 1920s, 1930s. Just remember what happened in the Spanish War. In the Spanish War, France and Great Britain, the two great democracies, they sacrificed the Spanish democracy in order to appease Hitler, and the outcome was a disaster. France and Great Britain, they tried to appease Italy in Mussolini in Italy in the Ethiopian crisis, and the result was a disaster. In any case, the strategy of appeasement does not work. We saw that also with Putin, and we see also that with Erdogan. Giving some concessions means that new concessions will be required. And as Benjamin Franklin, one of the founding fathers of the United States, said it, when you try to obtain a little bit of security at the cost of your honor, at the end, you lose both your honor and your security.
We keep speaking about Erdogan, Putin, Erdogan, etc. But the analysis overall point out that it's not only about Erdogan, it's the power constellation in Ankara. it having taken form since maybe, in a slow motion manner since 2014 and onwards until now, is composed of, let's not say Eurasianists, but mainly anti-Western elements, anti-NATO, pro-Russia, some of them, etc. So it's this constellation. Maybe it is, I don't know if you agree, but it's fair to say that Erdogan is ecumenical in this constellation of various actors in this power structure. And also, another paradox is that speaks in favor of this constellation with Erdogan on top is the anti-NATO, anti-Western sentiments, according to the public polls, is above 65% and nearly 70% in Turkish society. Yet, Turkey is part of many Western institutions with NATO on top, but there is this huge paradox now. Turkey is still in NATO, but causing lots of problems with another NATO ally, etc. And there is this phenomenon as well. I mean, a lot of people basically point out to Erdogan, but the picture seems much larger than that.
The picture is much larger. You are absolutely right. And in a few occasions, I tried to make a comparison with Nazi Germany. Of course, the two contexts are very different. We have to be aware of that. We shouldn't compare so easily the two contexts and the two countries, the two regimes. But still, there is at least one point which is common. In Germany, you had a double structure. The first structure was what you call the Führerprinzip, and it means that the Führer, Hitler, was at the end the one who could change the red line into the green line, green light. Without Hitler's wish, nothing would have been possible. And that was commonly admitted. Hitler was a kind of alpha and omega. And at the same time, when you see the German Nazi structures, actually there was not only Hitler. Hitler was the top of the constellation, or the federator of a constellation. Behind that, there was a kind of polycracy. The concept was used, and polycracy means that at the same time, you have a sort of cartel within the state. These cartels are ideologically convergent. And in the in the Nazi Germany case, the ideological conversion was against democracy, very strong anti-Semitism, the wish of eradicate the Jewish population in Europe, and to eradicate also Soviet Union anti-Slav populations in order to create a kind of Lebensraum, the vital space. And in Turkey, we have a similar situation. On one hand, Erdogan is the alpha and omega. I think that we cannot deny that. Without his will or his accord, his acceptance, nothing will be possible. But at the same time, Erdogan is definitely not the only one. You mentioned the pro-Putin forces in Turkey. Don't forget that you have a very strong anti-Western Kemalist tradition in Turkey. And you see that even in the opposition parties, the opposition parties to some extent can be much more radical, actually. The government itself, concerning NATO, concerning the relations with Greece, you have the radical right, and the radical right has its own dynamics, and you have the Sadat company. This paramilitary structure is both ultra-nationalistic and ultra-Islamistic. So I think that you are absolutely right, that there is a kind of coalition, and the fact that this coalition, the different components of this coalition, radicalize each other, makes the situation even worse than if, let's say, under a dictatorship, classical authoritarian tyranny. We are not facing a classical authoritarian tyranny. The American social scientist and social political scientist Charles Tilly used at once the concept of the fragmented tyranny. And we are facing in Turkey too, and not only in Turkey, a fragmented tyranny, which is federated by one person, but this tyranny is has a much broader social basis.
This brings us to one final question, Hamit. Let's end with where we started, with the Syrian potential incursion or imminent incursion onto Turkish by the Turkish armed forces. Many among the Kurdish diaspora, both in Europe and also small diaspora in North America, as well as in the region, they are increasingly worried about the emerging situation, very complicated, and with the United States, NATO, Turkey at the epicenter, Scandinavian countries sort of stumbling, etc. And also the unknowns in the Syrian and Iraqi Kurdish parts in terms of military future of battles, etc. The worry, the concern is, of course, about whether or not once more the Kurds will be, quote unquote, abandoned, left out, wasted in this turbulence. Do you agree with those? Do you share those concerns?
I do share these concerns, but at the same time, I will not make any kind of prediction concerning the future. We know what happened, for instance, in 2017. Afrin has been absolutely sacrificed by Putin, not because Putin had anything against the Kurds. The Russian administration repeats again and again that the Kurds should have their national rights in Syria, but Afrin has been sacrificed because the Russian government wanted to bomb Aleppo, and Turkey was a kind of obstacle for this. Sacrificing Afrin was meaning for Russia to win Aleppo and to control large sector of Syria. 2019, that was the capitulation of Trump administration, and Biden was absolutely upset, outraged by this capitulation. What will be the case tomorrow? It's very difficult to know. There is no American presence in the Kobane region, not even in the Manbij region, actually. These regions are controlled by Russia, and for Russia, deepening the conflict between Turkey and NATO is absolutely central. So they might be allowed, they might be tempted to allow Turkey to make such kind of incursions. So that's concerning the great powers, let's say. I am not sure that the Americans will allow Turkey to intervene in the east of Euphrates, where there is American military presence. And I am not sure that Turkey will dare to organize an attack, at least for a while. But beyond these great powers, we have also small powers or regional powers. And everything shows today that the Iranian strategy is absolutely contradicting Turkish ambitions. That does not mean that Iran will be able to stop a Turkish incursion, but we know by the past that Iran could help also the PKK members in Iraq, and recently you hear that every day there is one or two Turkish soldiers killed in Iraq during their incursions against PKK. So what will be the strategy of Iran? That's very difficult to know, to make some predictions about that. What will be the will of Bashar al-Assad? Because don't forget that Syria is mutilated, and today some parts of Syria are controlled by Turkey. Will Bashar al-Assad, who has not so much margins of maneuver, accept that there is still a new presence of Turkish military in his country? That it means that a new part of Syria will be mutilated by the acceptance of Putin. So all these questions have to be asked, but I have really no answer, at least for a while being.
Okay, let's leave it here. It's a complicated matter and needs to be discussed and analyzed further, of course. Professor Hamit Bozarslan joined me from Paris. Professor Bozarslan is with the School of Advanced Studies in Social Sciences, shortly called EHESS. Thank you for this conversation, Professor Bozarslan.
Thank you for having me.
So this is the end of Hot Pursuit. So we will meet again in another discussion about a hot topic. Bye.
You can follow Ahval News Online podcast series through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, and Spreaker. All you need to know about Turkey is here, for your ears, mind, and attention. Thank you for listening to our podcast.